Hey everyone, my name's Clinton Becker. I'm the Honest Car Guy. Today I want to share a little bit with you about my testimony, where my life has been and where God has taken me to. And at a young age, I grew up in church. I went to church regularly. We were members of the Church of Christ. I was active in the church. I was active in youth group outings and all those kind of things. And I think when I got to about the age of 16, I started to kind of, I wanted to fit in. So I did whatever I could to fit in. And at a young age, 15 years old, I started smoking cigarettes. I started experimenting with different things that I felt would get me accepted. Cussing and just all these things that I fell into. Fast forward to 18 years old. In my junior year, I turned 18. So when I was in third grade, I got held back a year. So when I was a junior in high school, I turned 18 years old. And at 18, I knew it all. I decided that I was going to go out on my own. I was going to live my own life, and I moved out. 18 years old, dropped out of high school my junior year, living on my own, drinking, partying, having different women in my life at all different times. Really just taking whatever I could from whomever I could to please myself. So at 18 years old, that's the way I lived. I really didn't have anything. I was working at a gas station. I was spending my money on beer and marijuana, and that was about it. When I got my GED, I felt like I'd really accomplished something. Dropping out of high school was tough. As I got a little bit older, I realized that was kind of an important thing. At that point, I decided I had to do something, right? I did college. That didn't work. It was time for me to do something. So I opened up a phone book, and I get a gentleman that answers the phone and says it's the Navy recruiting office. And I end up having a conversation with this guy. And they move fast, because I think it was within a month I was already in Indianapolis doing my MEPS training to go into the military. And I thought, this is it. I'm going to finally take responsibility. I'm finally going to get my life on track. So I go into the military. I go to basic training, which was amazing. It helped me really break down some of the flaws in my life, helped me become a little more responsible. I was able to stop smoking cigarettes. Obviously, I couldn't smoke in the boot camp, but I came out a little more mature. I came out a little more of a man, and I was excited, and I was eager to become a responsible person and to have this career in the United States military. I still was at a point where I was living for myself. Keep in mind, I hadn't been in church since I was probably 17 before I moved out. I went into the military because I wanted to do something with my life, but unfortunately there was still a big piece missing in my life. I didn't know what it was at the time, but I was still living for me. So I went into the military. I was on the ship a week, and we went on a six-month deployment to Europe. It was amazing. I saw places that I would have never seen without it. Unfortunately, my drinking ramped up pretty aggressively. I spent 6 months in Europe, and I have very few memories because I was intoxicated the whole time. I drank heavily. I smoked about 2.5 packs of cigarettes a day. Again, I abused every relationship I had. I just lived for me. I built some pretty strong relationships in the military. I burnt those bridges towards the end also. I remember I was in a pretty frustrated, depressed state towards the end of my military career, which only lasted about 2 years. I was living on my own. Some friends of mine, we had an apartment outside of the base, and we went out one night and we got really, really drunk. Did our normal thing, probably were at a strip club, doing just, all the things that the world says to do that will bring you pleasure. And we went back to our apartment that night. I was blackout drunk. I don't remember necessarily going to sleep, but I locked the bedroom door to my bedroom. And the next day I decided I was not going to go to work. And long story short, I ended up spending, I think it was 60 days in the brig, so military jail, 60 days in the brig. I had restriction. I couldn't leave the ship. If I wanted to step out on the pier to smoke a cigarette, I had to take somebody with me. And then everything was taken from me. My medals, any awards that I'd received, my sea bag, my uniforms. I have nothing left showing that I was in the military except for the pictures on my parents' wall from boot camp. And that's something that still is hard for me to this day because that was a big part of my life. But yeah, so I got sent to captain's mast, and I was given an other than honorable discharge. So, I praise God that I wasn't given a dishonorable discharge. I was given an other than honorable discharge. They took everything that I had ever showing that I was in the military. And I went back to just being a normal civilian who had dropped out of high school, been kicked out of college, and kicked out of the military. So I was really batting zero. So at this point, I was at the lowest place in my life. I had I had failed at everything I tried. I wasn't succeeding at anything in life. I came back home, and I didn't really know what I was going to do. I remember I got a job at a local factory. I was working, still partying. If I wasn't at work, I was spending money at the bars. I was playing pool, I was drinking beer. I wasn't using drugs anymore, but I was still just consuming massive amounts of alcohol. I mean, that was kind of just, if I wasn't going to work, I had to go out and drink to have fun. I had to party. I had to experiment with anything and everything that the world would say would bring me pleasure. I didn't have a steady relationship with a woman. So, anybody and everybody that would give me any type of affection, I would take advantage of that situation. And I became a pretty selfish person. So there's an individual in my life who is now my wife. And again, I was blessed to have her two children, Hannah and Zoe, become mine. And I've raised them ever since. But at that point in my life, I was a better person. And a lot of that is because of Rose. So I was a better person. I'd still drink. I'd still find ways to do that. Here we are, living together, raising a family together, not married. At that time, I had pretty much identified as an atheist. I didn't believe in anything. I'm just here. I'm just getting by. When I'm gone, I'm gone. And we're raising a family with no real values. We're not married. At that time, I didn't see the value in marriage. I probably said multiple times, it's just a piece of paper. It doesn't mean anything to me. It's never going to happen. And that probably put a strain on our relationship because, it's what future did we have? I don't know. 2009, Lexi was born. Shortly around that time, we had been talking, or my wife's family had been talking about moving to Florida. So slowly but surely, my wife's family started to move down there. So in 2009, I left Wilmington Auto Center. We packed up, we left Wilmington, and we moved to Florida. There's a lot of positive things that happened in Florida, but that's where my life truly spiraled out of control. And I remember getting down there. I went to the interview. I got the job. They offered me the job, and I was excited. But I had another interview that day at a call center. And this call center was inside, it's air conditioned, and I'm like, man, this is really, I'd like to be inside in the air conditioning because it's hot in Florida. So I left the dealership that I got hired at, and I immediately drove, we lived in Orlando. I immediately drove down the highway to this new place that was a call center. And I had no idea, I've never done call center stuff, but I'm good at sales, I'm good at talking, and I thought I can handle the phones. And she told me about how I could make $1,500 a week minimum, and I'd be in the air conditioning, and all I would be doing would be on the phone, making phone calls, ultimately helping people that own timeshares sell them. Now keep in mind, I didn't know what a timeshare was. I had no knowledge of a timeshare. I didn't know what in the world it was, but I was a young man who had just relocated his family to Florida, and she's telling me I can make $1,500 a week just calling people on the phone and helping them advertise their timeshares for rent or sale. I was intrigued. Long story short, I took that job over the car dealership. I worked there for about 6 months before I realized something wasn't right. Now, I was a top performer. Week after week, I led the sales board with the most amount of sales. I was given bonuses and perks from the owners. I know at one point they gave me like a $350 gift card to a restaurant. I was able to take my wife there. So I was given all these extra perks, and I was given extra bonus money, and I was making good money. 6 months in, a phone call came back to my desk that should have been caught by customer service. Now, at the time, I think I'm helping people advertise timeshares for rent or sale. That's all I'm doing. I'm selling advertisements online and at convention centers. I'm reading a state-approved script. I'm a licensed telemarketer by the state of Florida, so I think everything's good. This call comes through, and the lady is so upset. I remembered who she was when she told me who she was. And, I remember how upset she was. And she just kept telling me that I took advantage of her. And she kept saying that I cheated her. And she kept saying that it was a scam. And again, even though I spent most of my life being not the most upstanding person, pleasing myself, at that point, I'd never done anybody wrong in the aspect of scamming somebody. So it kind of didn't sit well with me. So I got her back to customer service, told her there had to be some sort of misunderstanding. And I sat on this for about a week. I was bothered by it. So I went to the owner. I went to the owner and his wife, and I talked to them. I told them the call came through and shared my concerns with them. And they assured me that everything was on the up and up. Don't worry, Clinton. Not everybody gets exactly what they what they think it's going to be, or I can't remember exactly how they justified it, but they justified it. Keep in mind, at this point, I'm making really good money. I've been there 6 months. So I'm on the line of getting consumed by money, but I still had some integrity. They talked to me. They made me feel better. I went back to my normal routine. Several months go by. I continue to keep doing it. And like that, my mind shifted and I had just become consumed with money. I continued to outperform everybody. I continued to sell more. I continued to get special perks from the ownership. And that is when the shift happened. I had become so consumed with money that about a year in, I realized that what I was doing was not necessarily giving these people the success that they hoped for, and it certainly wasn't giving them the results that I promised. But I justified it in my head because I said, I'm a licensed telemarketer by the state. I have a approved script that the state has to approve. Clearly, what I'm doing is not wrong or they wouldn't approve it. So I continued to do the job. Long story short, there was no results for these people. When it's all said and done, you cannot sell or rent a timeshare online. It doesn't happen. And I worked for a company that made promises to people and these things never happened. By the time that I realized that it was pretty much 100% fictitious, I was so consumed with money and power and success that I'd lost sight of who I really was. I'd lost sight of everything. I was drinking again. I would go out with my coworkers and party. I would, make up stories about doing certain things with the business when I was really going out and partying. I would tell my family lies because I really didn't care about anybody but myself. I cared about making money and being the best salesperson in the call center. So again, this led me to meet an individual that would change my life. And we'll just call him Wolf because that was his nickname. That's what he went by. And I met this gentleman. He worked in the call center when I did. He would just sit quietly at his cubicle. And I always noticed this older gentleman had just a phone and a leather zip-up binder. And he would open it up. He'd have his notepad. He'd make phone calls. He would zip it up and he would take it with him. So the only thing ever at his desk was a phone. He was intriguing. He was really good at what he did. And I pretty much beat him all the time. Well, after I was consistent with my sales, I remember one day he talked to me. And he started picking my brain and he would start to give me some advice. And he kind of took me under his wing and he let me know that he'd seen a lot of people come in here that were good but not consistent. And so we kind of created a relationship at that point of becoming friends, I guess you would say. Fast forward a little bit, I left that call center. I bounced around to some different call centers because a lot of these people in these timeshare call centers, they would leave, go open up their own call center doing timeshare fraud, let's call it what it is. Or they would go work for other people and they would bounce around. So I left and went to a couple other places. And then one day, Wolf reached out to me. I'm not really sure how he got my information, but he called me. And he said he had a proposition for me. This proposition he had to explain to me in person. So I met him at a restaurant. He bought me appetizers and he bought me drinks. At the time, that was the way to my heart, money and alcohol, right? And I remember sitting with him at this restaurant as he explained to me what he called a dirty pitch. And basically the dirty pitch was 100% fraud. It was 100% a scam. He told me that he'd been practicing it in his apartment, in his underwear, and he was making all kinds of money. At the point I was lost, I was broken, I was a liar. All I cared about was money. But I obviously couldn't rush into anything. And the last thing he did was he slipped me an envelope and he said, here, just take this and get back with me. And in the envelope was like $500. So I left that restaurant and I didn't even make it home and I realized I'm doing this. I sent him a text message and I said, I'm in. And that would forever change my life. That one decision like that would change my life. Again, was it for an envelope of $500 or was it for the thought of being he did a good job of making me feel really special, making me feel like I was going to be this super successful, rich person. And in my mind, I justified it by saying, I want financial freedom for my family. I'm doing this for my family. I'm doing this. I gave myself all these reasons of why I was doing it. But at the end of the day, it was fraud. At the end of the day, I was becoming a professional liar and cheater. So I took his offer. And within that week, we met at an office. He created this whole fake world. We had a really nice office at a big office complex. He had a fake company name, and we were a fake company. This company that we advertised to be wasn't real. And in reality, we were sitting in this call center just fictitiously selling timeshares. We were calling people across the United States, and we were defrauding them. And this is something that until a couple years ago I really struggled with. I look back at the decisions I made in my life and the people that I hurt, and it really tore me up. And one thing that I will say at this point is that one thing God did was He reminded me that Jesus paid that price. That I couldn't sit and punish myself repeatedly for the decisions that I made. That when I gave my life to God, when I was saved in 2013, that at that point all of those things were erased and gone. That Jesus died for me, and that blood washed away those things. And that's one thing that has helped me over the last couple of years of my life to realize that I cannot beat myself up for those decisions. I had to take responsibility for them, but I couldn't beat myself up. So going back to this, I took this job, and we're in this call center and making a lot of money. The call center started to grow. It started to grow pretty rapidly. He was bringing in a lot more people. After about 6 months, I was at a point where I didn't think that I could any longer be with them, because the reality is it was getting a little too loose. They were bringing in people that were a little loud and would go downstairs and smoke. And you ran the risk of somebody saying the wrong thing to somebody in this real office building. And the last thing you wanted was somebody to find out you weren't really who you say you were. So after 6 months, I parted ways with Wolf. It wasn't the easiest parting of ways. There were people that told me that he had mentioned about hurting me and making sure that I didn't say anything. But I was able to break free of that. At this point in my life, when I left, I was kind of at a crossroads where I didn't want to continue to be the person that I was, but I was also accustomed to a certain lifestyle. I'd been making a lot of money. I had a certain level of power, and I didn't really know how to transition back into the normal life, but I was kind of at a place of emptiness. I didn't know what to do. So I thought, you know what, I'll get a job on the phones at a real call center. So I took a job at a vacation package call center where they sold real vacation packages. I did horrible. I think I was there a month, and I barely made minimum wage. I couldn't sell a vacation package to save my life. And I think really at the end of the day, because I'd spent so much of my recent life just defrauding people, I didn't know how to be honest. I didn't know how to, I didn't know how to do it. So that lasted about a month. I barely made any money. I went back to selling cars, and I got a job at a new car dealer selling used and new cars in Longwood, Florida. Same thing, I did horrible. So the only thing I could think to do was let's get on Craigslist and find another job doing illegal timeshare fraud. And that's what I did. I went back to Craigslist and I found a job for timeshare resale. Justified it in my head that I've already lost the car, I can't lose everything. I can't do that to my family. This is for my family. I just continued to justify it. So I called up this ad on Craigslist, and I had an interview with a guy. And this is just an example of how small the world is. I took this interview, and I interviewed with the guy. He says, I love it. You're great. I think you'll do phenomenal. I want you to meet the owner, the big man. So he sets up an interview, and I meet the big man. And when he shows up and he finds out my name, he says, I've heard your name before. I know your name and I know how good you are in this business. And I'm thinking, what in the world? His partner was a guy from my past at the other call centers that I worked with, ironically enough. And so that really didn't work out to my advantage, because I wanted to go into this just quietly, just try and make some money. And I ended up coming full circle and getting back in bed with people that I previously worked with. Now, not the guy Wolf, but another person. And that opened up the final stage of my spiral to disaster. He wanted me to be in charge of running my own call center. So basically, he gave me a position, and we started building this fraudulent empire. And we ran it for quite a while. And we made a lot of money, and I made a lot of bad decisions. I would disappear on my family for nights at a time. A few months into it, I got consumed with so much greed that that's all I thought about. I showed my family I loved them by spending money on them. I would disappear for days at a time. I was probably spending $300 to $500 a day on cocaine. I was drinking at work. I was getting drunk at work. I would come home at maybe midnight, 1 in the morning. Sometimes I wouldn't come home at all till the next day. I had completely spiraled out of control. Now, keep in mind, I've got Hannah and Zoe, who I've raised since they were young. Rose and I had Lexi, our daughter, and at this point, she is pregnant with Devin, our final child. She's pregnant with him, and I'm disappearing for days at a time. I remember there were several times that I would come home and she actually questioned me, "Are you doing drugs?" And I would fight with her, and I'd be so hateful with her. "How dare you question me like that?" But the whole time it was true. I was so good at lying that my lies had become reality. I truly thought my life, like what I was doing, was real. The house I rented was under a fictitious name. Nothing I did was real. I made everybody in my life believe that I had this really successful job, when all along I was a fake, I was a fraud. So I'm consuming cocaine on a daily basis. I'm drunk on a daily basis. I'm neglecting my family, and I'm defrauding people all over the United States. I got to a point where I had hit such a place of rock bottom. I remember two situations that really show how far gone I was. We were going to come back to Ohio to visit family. And I told my wife I would be home by, let's say, 5 o'clock. My sister-in-law, my mother-in-law, my brother-in-law, I'm pretty sure, we were all meeting at my home, and we were going to drive back all together to Ohio because we were all going back to visit. I said I'd be back by 5. That day I told myself, "Clinton, you're not going to use drugs, you're not going to drink, because you've got to be back at the house by 5 so that you can go back and visit family in Ohio." I made it to 10:30 in the morning before I purchased cocaine. And I spent my entire day using cocaine, drinking, while doing my job, defrauding people. And I don't think I got to our house until almost midnight that night. And I remember when one of my coworkers, one of my employees, brought me home, there's a line of vehicles out front of my house running where my sister-in-law and all of them were waiting on me. My wife is frantic, and of course I'm high, and I got to run inside and trying to pack clothes, and she's already got my clothes packed. And that was one of the worst, 15-hour drives from Florida to Ohio. Because as I'm coming down from using drugs, my brain is spinning, and I'm thinking, as I'm sobering up, I'm going, what am I doing? What has my life become? It's completely out of control. So that's one example. The other example, when I realized that I'd completely hit rock bottom, was shortly before my life changed. Is there were nights where I would just disappear, and there were nights where I'd stay at work by myself. And I remember one night I was there by myself. I was blaring music, drinking beer, and using cocaine. And I remember sitting there crying, wanting out of it. And I felt like I felt like I was chained up. It's like a bottle with the bottom cut out, and I was just dumping stuff in it, and nothing was working. And I remember that night, 3 in the morning, sitting there crying with cocaine in front of me, just trying to find a way out. And I had at that point I was so broken that I didn't know what to do. But I didn't want to be in that place anymore. Shortly after that is when God intervened. So there's been a lot of people in my life over the course of my life that have planted seeds, that have come by and watered those seeds, that have poured into me. My family never giving up on me, my wife's family never giving up. My brother-in-law, Sim, is an amazing man of God. And Sim consistently planted seeds in my life. Even when we were in Florida, when I thought I had everybody fooled, people realized that I wasn't really who I said I was. And Sim consistently planted seeds in my life. He started inviting us to church. He had found this church. These people had come by his apartment and invited him to church. And I mean, it was this Southern gospel church. And he kept inviting us to church, and I kept blowing him off. I don't know what the shift was, but I was at such a place of brokenness. My relationship with Rose was horrible. At this point I was drinking myself to an oblivion. I was using drugs. There were a couple instances where I told my wife I was going to take my life. And I remember one night I ate a bunch of pills hoping that I wouldn't wake up. And I was so broken. So I told him, I said, yeah, we'll go to church Sunday. Why not? I told my wife, okay, we're going to go to church. So we all got ready. We got up that Sunday morning and we went to church with my brother-in-law and my mother-in-law. And I remember walking into church. And at the time I was a mean guy. I had a handlebar mustache. I was an angry person. And I remember walking into this small little church, and immediately this young man comes up and hugs me. "Welcome, brother." And I'm like, I don't want you touching me. I don't want you hugging me. And we went into the service. And, I was raised in church again my whole life. But I remember halfway through that service feeling something, and I don't know what it was, but I do now, but I felt something, and it was hard to explain at the time. So the service ended, and we went home, and I went back to my normal week of just being a dirtbag. He invited us to come to the next service, the next Sunday. Why not? So we decided to go a second Sunday in a row. And this is when the shift in my life happened. Halfway through that service, it was just like fingers snapped. Halfway through that service, I knew my created value. Halfway through that service, I knew that Jesus died for me. Halfway through that service, I realized who I was created to be. And it was that quick. I immediately got up, I went outside, I called my sister, who's married to a pastor, and I told her everything. I told her that my life had been a fraud. I told her that I wasn't this successful business person, that I was abusing alcohol and drugs, and I was lying and cheating and stealing, and that my life was fake. And from that point, knowing who I was created to be, knowing that I was loved, knowing that God could set me free, that's when the shift happened. And I remember in that moment realizing that I had to change everything about my life. See, it wasn't as simple as just quitting my job and getting a normal job. I had to shift everything. I had to come back home. We had to come back to Ohio. And that's what we did. It was difficult towards the end. I remember one night we sat at home in our house in Florida. I had people calling me, leaving me voicemails, threatening to kill me, kill my family because I was leaving that life. I couldn't do anything. I couldn't call the local law enforcement and tell them that this was happening because they would have wanted to know why it was happening. I can't really tell them because I've been a criminal. So I was kind of at a place where I was lost. I was scared to death. So I called John Atkins, the owner of Wilmington Auto Center, my previous employer when I lived in Ohio. I said, John, hey, I'm going to move back to Ohio, and you said if I ever moved back, I'd have a job. Is that right? And John said, yeah, come back to work. So at that point, we put the pieces in motion to move back. We came back in, I believe it was, I want to say April or June of 2013. We moved back to Ohio. I got my job back here at Wilmington Auto Center and allowed God to just work in my life. We found a church home in Hillsboro. We allowed God to grow within our relationship. And it was an amazing experience to watch God grow. One thing that I tell people, and one thing that I've learned in the last 6 years of my life is that all of our choices have consequences. You see, I decided that I was going to give my life fully to God, and I decided that I was going to surrender everything I had to Him, and that I was going to be honest about every decision I made. But there's consequences for our actions. I remember being back at the dealership here for a few months, and myself and the owner, John, were parking cars on the lot, and I saw two gentlemen walk up in suits and approach John while I was in a car. And I see the one guy had a binder with a star on it. And instantly my heart kind of dropped, because when I got saved, I told God, if law enforcement ever comes to me about the stuff I've done, I'm going to be 100% honest. Well, right when I saw those two gentlemen in suits, one with a binder with a star on it, I realized this is that moment. And I remember John pointed at me. And when he pointed at me, the guys looked at me, and I thought, oh man, here we go. I got out of the car, and they introduced themselves, and they were two gentlemen from the Ohio State Attorney General's office. Florida, the FDLE, Florida Department of Law Enforcement, sent them to come talk to me because of what I'd done in Florida. Every action has a consequence. Every decision we make, there's a consequence. You know, when I was in that life, I felt like I was untouchable. But eventually those choices come back. They come back. In this case, it was 2 years later. I talked with them, and just like I told God, I'm going to be honest. We went to the local state highway patrol post. I waived all my rights. I signed a little paper, and I confessed everything that I had done. It was really rough. It is not what you see on TV. I can promise you that. But I let them know how God saved my life, and I let them know that because God saved my life, that I was a different person, but that I took responsibility for my actions. And at that point, it started an investigation with Florida. From that point, it started moving very fast. I had to get a lawyer. I went to Florida, 2 or 3 times. Once without my lawyer, I had to turn myself in, bail out. We went before a judge. I pleaded guilty to my crimes, and I was looking at 2 years in Florida State Prison. I ended up serving 4.5 months of 6 months in Hillsborough County Jail in Tampa. During that 4 months, God broke me. God broke me down and built me up. I had more intimate relationships with God during that time. I got closer to God than I ever could. And something else amazing happened. During that 4.5 months away, my family never went without. Every bill was paid. My old sales manager, Brad Roach, Brad, if you ever see this, you're amazing. He brought my family Christmas. Every week I had a care package delivered, snacks and chips and stuff. God provided. He provided for my family. He provided for me. And after 4.5 months, I made it out safe and healthy and with a stronger relationship with God. So that 4.5 months, I had a guy that I was in jail with, and he asked me, he said, would you change it? Would you change all this? I said, no, I wouldn't. This is the course that God had. I had to be completely broken, and I had to go to a place of complete brokenness to come back to Him. And the 4.5 months in jail was horrible. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. But ultimately, it's what helped me become who I am today. So I get out of jail April 21st, 2015. I get out of jail. I've got 10 years probation. I have a Florida probation officer. I have an Ohio probation officer. And I come back to Ohio. And I come back to my job. And I'm living life. And I'm excited to have my legal stuff behind me. And we have a family trip planned to Disney, 2015. December 2015, we're taking the family to Disney. It's going to be amazing. And about 2 months before my Disney trip, I get a call. I'm here working. I'm selling cars. I'm busy. And one of the ladies in the office keeps telling me that a gentleman keeps calling for me. And I'm like, I don't know that name, but he must really want to buy a car. He's called 3 times today. I take his phone call. He answers the phone and says his name and identifies himself with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And immediately my heart just sinks in my chest. So I shut the doors in the office and I took the phone call. Long story short, my interaction with Wolf is now being investigated. You see, the first thing that I did was the same pattern of crime, but it was with a different outfit. Now Wolf's company is being investigated. To fast forward, my lawyer got involved. We made several trips to Las Vegas at the federal courthouse in Las Vegas, several meetings with the FBI, several meetings with the United States prosecutor. And through those situations, I was able to share the gospel. I was able to share Jesus with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I was able to share Jesus with the federal prosecutors and let people know how God had set me free and that I wasn't the same person, but that I was guilty of my crimes. And it was amazing to see how they reacted to that. They treated me like a person. They could truly see that I was different, but they also had to prosecute me for my crimes, which I completely understood. That took 3 years. Another 3 years of a dozen trips to Las Vegas, another 3 years of statements and reliving the choices that I made. April of this year, April 2019, all of this came to a close. I'm blessed to have so many people in my life that have supported me, family, friends, customers. I had over 50 customers write letters about me to the federal judge. The owner of the dealership, John Adkins, personally flew to Las Vegas with me just to speak on my behalf. I went to the sentencing in April 2019 and I was scared to death. I don't think I've ever sweat that much. I'm standing before the judge and he's letting me know that he can take away everything that I've built. He's letting me know that he can take away part of my future. But he also let me know that he doesn't look at charts and guidelines, that he looks at the person. And he brought up the letters from the customers that talked about a car salesman that had integrity and a car salesman that loved God and a car salesman that shared his story with everybody. And then he let me know that he could sense that I was a different person. I was facing 3 years in federal prison. Federal sentencing there's guidelines, there's points. And based off the fact that I had the previous crime, which was the same crime, it still qualified me for a certain amount of points because unfortunately I served that 4.5 months in jail. With that and the offense being a first-degree felony of organized fraud and all that kind of stuff, I had like 21 points on my record. Now, the federal government knew that I cooperated and they knew that I was a different person, so they reduced it down to 17 points, but still 17 points put me at 3 years federal prison. My lawyer assured me that I would more than likely do time. I had convinced myself that I was going to prison, and it is what it is. And I had gotten to a pretty negative headspace. I was scared, but I convinced myself I was going to jail. We went there, the judge said his things to me, and then he looked at the federal probation officer and said, how do we get him to probation? And at that point, I kind of stopped breathing because I'm like, is he really considering this? The federal probation officer was totally confused because he's like, I don't know how to do it. He goes, how do we do it? He goes, you reduce him down to like 11 points or something, or 7 points. So the judge sat there for a few minutes, kind of talked some more. And this is after John Atkins spoke on my behalf. This is after my lawyer spoke on my behalf. And the judge said, we're going to do an 11-point reduction and we're going to give you 3 years probation. I honestly wanted to run up and hug the judge, but that probably would have put me in jail. The federal judge reduced my 3-year prison sentence to 3 years probation. My lawyer was shocked. I have a friend of mine whose dad is a judge, and he even messaged me and said it's unheard of for a federal judge to give that kind of a reduction. And at the end of the day, it's God. Like, God set me free. God was with me in the courtroom in Florida when I was looking at 2 years prison, and I got 6 months county jail. God was with me when I was looking at 3 years federal prison, and I only got 3 years probation. God has been with me through all of this. God set me free from cocaine addiction, from alcoholism. He set me free from me, from the need to fulfill my flesh. My wife and I got married. Shortly after I got out of jail, my wife and I got married so that we could become one in the eyes of God, so that we could show our children how important marriage is, that living fully for God is what is important. And by doing that, God has blessed me beyond anything I could imagine. And I want to encourage you to know that God can get you through anything. The littlest things we allow Satan to use to bring us down. But again, I was set free from so much. And I tell people all the time, if it wasn't for God, I would be dead or in prison for the rest of my life. And it's 2 Corinthians 5:17. It says, therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old has passed away. Behold, the new has come. This is my life verse because I am a new creation. The old is gone. And that is the amazing thing about God. When He comes into your life, you become a new creation, a new creature. And I'm thankful for Jesus and the sacrifice that He made. I'm thankful that His blood washed away my sinful past. 2 Corinthians 5:17 is my life verse. And I thank God and I praise God for the gift that He gave me and His Son and the fact that the old is gone and the new has come.